In this 25th anniversary year of September 11th, the Tunnel to Towers Foundation continues to honor America's heroes. Heroes like Fire Lieutenant Michael Wells, who was inspired by 9/11 to serve his community. After 14 dedicated years of service, he lost his battle with occupational cancer, leaving behind his wife, Katie, and their 3 children. Tunnel to Towers honored Lieutenant Wells by paying off the family's mortgage in recognition of his sacrifices. Donate $11 monthly and amplify your impact with a car or land donation. Go to T2T.org.
Listen, all you New Yorkers. Taxi.
Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
Walter Sterling, you and I are talking to Michelle Gibson. Michelle Gibson is a researcher, a journalist, a friend of the show. She's raised so many issues that we talk about constantly. I have her on once a week as a footnote to make sure we got anything right. Last night, you and I talked about the insane asylums that were built throughout America that seem to bear no relationship to the population. Now, Michelle, share with us what you think they were built for and when they were built, which you don't believe is when it says erected on a date. It was something else. So, Michelle, welcome to the show. Hi.
Hi, thank you, Walter. And yes, that's correct. And that goes not only for the insane asylums, but for all the other architecture that we've been told was built when we were told it was built. And it was actually already here. And not just in North America, but South America, all over the world. You see the same style of architecture. You see the same Capitol-type buildings. You see the same cathedrals all over the earth. Everywhere. A little place called New Caledonia, an island group not far from Australia. You see the same type of cathedral that you do in New York City and Paris. And it's the same with the insane asylums. They were already here. They would have had a very different purpose. And my research has taken me along what are best known as ley lines. It's hard to find information about them because they were removed from our collective awareness. They used to be on maps. They were taken off of maps. But the whole old world was built along these ley lines, and it was interconnected, and it was part of an energy grid. And I'm saying that because every single piece of architecture, from the insane asylums to the cathedrals to today's universities, which in many cases look like prisons. A lot of prisons and universities have the same design. You can look up Georgetown University and you can look up the prison in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and it looks very similar. It's like a coin toss. What are we going to use this for? But it was all part of this energy grid. And so when this event happened that caused a total reset of history and removed this highly advanced civilization from our awareness, these buildings that were once equipment, if you will, on this energy grid became part of the matrix, became part of how humanity was controlled in universities with information, with the new narrative. And, in prisons, you have the same idea. That's more in your face control. Insane asylums. And so that's what it was used for. And since it was on what was originally a pre-energy grid, it would have been changing the energy into basically suffering, essentially, especially in the case of prisons and insane asylums. So these insane asylums specifically came about in the mid-1850s. We see the year 1850 a lot in this new narrative as far as when things were said to have started and happened. Same thing with the insane asylums. And there was a man named Thomas Story Kirkbride who is credited with this plan for insane asylums that was reputedly ethical and humane. And I really personally believe nothing is further from the truth. And the first one was in Trenton, New Jersey. they were called insane asylums or lunatic asylums that morphed into state hospitals. And some of them are still standing today. A lot of the Kirkbride facilities, insane asylums, whatever you want to call them, are haunted. The ones that are have been abandoned. There's also former insane asylums that were turned into housing units, residential housing. You see that in a lot of places. So many of them were repurposed. A few of them were torn down, but there's really quite a few that are still with us. And if we wonder how we got to a point where people are at the level of consciousness where we see today, where there's a lot of discord, a lot of focus on material things and physical needs and things like that, how did we get to a point where we forgot everything? And I think the insane asylums were part of that. I think that could have been like an early re-education program or nonconformists, or the people that ended up there would have been the ones that they were having trouble with re-educating, if you will. And so I think that's the significance of them, why they were so large. They were pre-existing architecture, but they needed space for a lot of people, would be what I would surmise with that.
Michelle Gibson, journalist, researcher, explaining alternative history and how we got here. I am fascinated by the enormous buildings that were built allegedly in the 1850s for insane people. How did they identify somebody who was insane in 1850? Because our diagnosis of mental illness needs a lot of work today. What were the diagnoses that were getting these people into beds of thousands and thousands, hospital beds?
Right. That's where I don't think they were actually insane, or if they were insane, they were made insane by whatever conditions there were at the time.
Right.
And they needed people that were compliant, that were easy to influence, and the ones that weren't were the ones that got into the insane asylums. There was one in St. Joseph's, Missouri, and this is one that people can look up. There's a psychiatric museum there, the Glore, Glore Psychiatric Museum, and it's got, I believe it's advertised as a history of these kinds of places going back to medieval times, but I feel like it was a lot of the same things that people were subjected to. And it shows these wheels that people would be put on. I do not believe that the 19th century was a good time for humanity.
No,
there were horrible things happening, and this was part of it. The insane asylums were part of it. And when I have done work on them, I've gotten a lot of comments from people that it really resonated with, because the history of that kind of thing in the family, some relative that was in one, and just a lot of questions about it.
Right. So husbands could assign their wives to insane asylums basically because they thought their wife was annoying. And then one of the diagnoses you mentioned before that kept coming up when you look at the people and who was there, nostalgia seemed to be a problem. If somebody was nostalgic, if they were too attached to the past, they needed to go to this. Now, who was doing this? Was the United States government doing this? What was the profit motive to hospitalize all of these people?
I think that people behind the New World Order agenda, the families, the ones that we hear about, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the DuPonts, the Astors, they were all building this new system based on oil and gas, for example, instead of this free energy that was wiped out. Astor got his fortune besides real estate development in New York City, he got it in opium. And if you start looking back at the history of the families, the early history of these wealthy families, they got their start in drugs. And opium was a big one. And so they were trying to bring in things that would dumb down the masses, if you will. The drugs, the alcohol, that was all coming in at the same time too. Breweries and distilleries were popping up everywhere. And so they really wanted people out of it. And when you get into, again, the people that are harder to program, or even people that were survivors, perhaps, of this previous civilization ended up there. It wasn't good, but those that were bringing in this new social order, this new economic system, which was in large part based on wage-based slavery, so people working in factories and mills, and a lot of us have that kind of history in our families. In my family, on my mother's side of the family, they worked in textile mills in North Carolina, where they're barely paid a living wage, and maybe they have a job for life, but it's really not a great quality of life because they work long hours and
right.
Whatever. So it was based on this extraction of people's energy through work and through money, and how they got control over so many different things in our world today, even. And again, you just really have to follow the money to know what I'm talking about with hedge funds and so forth.
All right, this is
finance.
Right. Michelle Gibson, how do we find you online and learn more about this amazing subject of the world's reset, the insane asylums that seem to suddenly be needed in potato fields and cornfields? How do we find you?
My website is piercingtheveilofillusion.com, and my YouTube channel is at Michelle Gibson 8946.
Michelle Gibson 8946. piercingtheveilofillusion.com, right?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, Michelle Gibson, you're a good friend of mine. You're a good friend of the show. Thank you very much for being on the other side of midnight.
The playoffs are here, and you can predict the action all the way to the finals with FanDuel Predicts. Predict the spread, the total points, and even the game-winning moments that make the playoffs. Sign up and get a $25 bonus with FanDuel Predicts.
Offered by FanDuel Prediction Markets, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant. 18-plus bonus is non-withdrawable and expires 7 days after receipt. Trading derivatives involves significant risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Manage your activity with their consumer protection tools. Restrictions apply. See terms at FanDuel.com/predicts/bonus-offer-terms.